Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And today, I want to share with you a story that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. It's about family, betrayal, and the moment I had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting everything I'd worked for my entire life. If you've ever felt torn between family obligations and standing up for yourself, this story might resonate with you in ways you don't expect. My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old, living in Seattle with my husband Michael. We've been married for 8 years, and for most of that time, I genuinely believed I'd hit the jackpot with my mother-in-law, Linda. She seemed like one of those warm, southern women you see in movies, the kind who always has fresh cookies in the oven and calls everyone honey. She's from a small town in Georgia, the type of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, where the local diner still serves sweet tea in mason jars, and where Sunday church is as much about catching up on gossip as it is about worship. When Michael and I first started dating 12 years ago, I was nervous about meeting his mother. You know how it is, ladies. We all have those stories about difficult mothers-in-law, the ones who think no woman is good enough for their precious baby boy. But Linda surprised me. The first time we met, she pulled me into this enormous hug that smelled like vanilla and hairspray, and she held my face in her hands and said, "Oh, honey, you're even prettier than Michael said you were." I remember feeling this wave of relief wash over me because here was this woman who could have been territorial or cold, and instead, she was treating me like I was already family. Those early years were good. Really good. Linda would call me every Sunday evening, right after her church service, and we'd chat for maybe 20 or 30 minutes about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about her week, about the drama at her church, which she attended religiously, pun intended. There was always something going on. Sister Margaret's daughter running off with a boy from 2 towns over, Brother James getting caught sneaking cigarettes behind the fellowship hall, or the ongoing feud between the 2 women who ran the church bake sale. I'd listen and laugh, and she'd ask about my work, about our plans, about when we might give her some grandbabies. Those conversations felt easy and natural, like talking to a friend rather than navigating the complex dynamics of an in-law relationship. I need to tell you about my career because it's central to what happened. I'm a family law attorney, specializing in divorces. It took me 7 years to get where I am today. 3 years of law school that nearly broke me, both financially and emotionally, followed by 4 years of clawing my way up in a profession that doesn't always welcome women with open arms. I work at a small boutique firm in downtown Seattle, the kind of place where your reputation is everything. We handle high-profile cases, the ones where discretion isn't just important, it's absolutely essential. When tech executives divorce, when old Seattle money splits up, when there are millions of dollars in custody battles and family businesses at stake, that's when they come to us. Michael supported me through all of it. When I was in law school, he worked 2 jobs to pay our rent and keep food on the table. He'd come home exhausted from his day job in construction, grab a quick shower, and head out to his night job stocking shelves at a grocery store. I'd be hunched over my textbooks, surrounded by empty coffee cups and highlighters, and he'd kiss the top of my head and tell me it would all be worth it someday. He never complained, not once. He'd bring me sandwiches when I forgot to eat, quiz me with flashcards when I had exams, and hold me when the stress got so bad I'd cry into my pillow at 2 in the morning. Linda loved that I was becoming a divorce attorney. At first, I thought it was just motherly pride. You know, her daughter-in-law, the lawyer. But I quickly realized she had a more specific interest. She was fascinated by the drama of it all. During our Sunday phone calls, she'd always work the conversation around to my cases. "So, honey," she'd say, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone that meant she was fishing for gossip. "Tell me about your week. Any interesting cases? Any of those Seattle millionaires getting divorced?" I learned to navigate these conversations carefully. Attorney-client privilege isn't just some abstract concept they teach you in law school. It's the foundation of everything I do. My clients trust me with their darkest secrets, their financial details, their fears about losing their children. That trust is sacred. So I'd give Linda little crumbs, nothing that could identify anyone, nothing specific. I'd say things like, "Oh, I have a client who's trying to hide assets in offshore accounts." Or, "You wouldn't believe it, but I have a case where both parties want to keep the dog more than the house." just enough to satisfy her curiosity without crossing any ethical lines. For 6 years, this arrangement worked perfectly. Linda got her little glimpses into the drama of Seattle's elite. I maintained my professional boundaries, and everyone was happy. She'd take these tiny morsels of information and spin them into stories for her church friends, always careful to mention that her daughter-in-law was a big-shot lawyer in Seattle. I didn't mind. It made her happy, and it wasn't hurting anyone. The problems started about 8 months ago, though I didn't recognize them as problems at the time. Linda's calls became more frequent, and her questions about my work became more persistent. Instead of our usual Sunday evening chats, she started calling 2 or 3 times a week. "Just checking in, honey," she'd say. But within minutes, she'd be asking about my cases. Had I had any new clients? Any celebrities? Any really juicy divorces? When I'd give her my usual vague responses, she'd press for more details. What were their names? How much money was involved? Were there affairs? Secret children? Hidden assets? I started feeling uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Linda, after all. Sweet Linda, who sent us care packages full of homemade cookies and Michael's favorite beef jerky. Linda, who had welcomed me into her family without hesitation. Surely she just found my work interesting. Surely she understood the boundaries. Michael noticed the change too. After one particularly persistent call, where Linda had asked the same question 3 different ways, trying to get more information about a case, he took the phone from me and gently but firmly told his mother that I couldn't share details about my work. "Mom," he said, "you know Sarah can't talk about her cases. It's not just about being private, it's the law. She could lose her license." Linda laughed it off, said she understood, said she was just curious because it all sounded so fascinating. But something had shifted. I could feel it. The real trouble began when we decided to fly Linda out for Michael's 35th birthday. It seemed like such a nice thing to do at the time. She hadn't visited us in over a year, and Michael missed his mom. We have a beautiful home in the Queen Anne neighborhood, a 1920s craftsman that we'd spent 2 years renovating. We have a guest room with its own bathroom, a garden view, and plenty of space for everyone to have privacy. What could go wrong? Linda arrived on a Thursday evening, and at first, everything seemed normal. She gushed over the house, complimented my cooking, and spent Friday exploring the neighborhood while Michael and I were at work. She seemed genuinely happy to be there, taking pictures of the Space Needle, riding the streetcar, acting like a tourist. That night, we all went out for dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, and it felt like old times. Linda told embarrassing stories about Michael's childhood. We laughed until our sides hurt. And I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a mother-in-law I actually enjoyed spending time with. Saturday morning changed everything. Michael had to go into the office for a few hours to handle an emergency on a construction site he was managing. I was working from home, tucked away in my home office, dealing with one of my most complex and sensitive cases. The divorce involved a prominent Seattle businessman, his wife of 20 years, substantial assets, and some very delicate custody issues involving their 3 children. The kind of case where one leaked detail could destroy lives and reputations. My home office is my sanctuary. It's a converted bedroom at the back of the house with built-in bookshelves, a vintage oak desk that belonged to my grandmother, and a view of our garden. More importantly, it has a 6-digit lock on the door. We installed it not because of Linda or any trust issues, but because Michael collects firearms and stores some of them in the office safe. It was a security measure we'd both agreed on when we bought the house. The code was supposed to be known only to us. I worked for about 3 hours that morning, deep in depositions and financial documents. The case was at a critical juncture, and I needed to prepare a strategy for the upcoming mediation. When I finally surfaced, I realized I'd lost track of time, and Linda and I had plans to go to lunch. I quickly saved my work, closed the file folder on my desk, and went to shower and change. I remember specifically closing that folder because one of the photos in it was particularly sensitive, and even though no one else was supposed to be in my office, I'm careful by habit. When I emerged from our bedroom, ready for lunch, Linda was in the living room reading a magazine. She looked up with a bright smile and said she was ready whenever I was. We decided on a trendy little cafe in Fremont, the kind of place that serves $15 salads and has a wait list on weekends. The rain had stopped. rare for Seattle in spring, and we actually had some weak sunshine. It should have been a perfect afternoon. We were seated at a small table by the window, and I was just starting to relax, thinking about whether to get the salmon salad or the quinoa bowl, when Linda leaned forward with this strange glint in her eye. "So, honey," she said, her voice low and excited, "whatever happened with the Johnson case? Did she get to keep the embryos, or were they destroyed?" I felt like someone had dumped ice water over my head. The names she used, the specific details about embryos, those were from the file on my desk, the file that had been closed, in my locked office, that she had no business knowing about. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. There was no way she could know these details unless— "And what about the custody arrangement?" Linda continued, oblivious to my shock. "3 children is a lot to manage. Is he fighting for joint custody, or is she trying to get sole? I imagine with his travel schedule, it would be difficult for him to manage 50-50 custody." The iced tea I'd been sipping went down the wrong way, and I started coughing, spraying tea across the table. The waiter rushed over with napkins. Other diners turned to stare, and there I was, the composed attorney, looking like I'd forgotten how to drink properly. But I barely noticed the embarrassment because my mind was reeling. She knew about the travel schedule. She knew about the embryo dispute. She knew details that were buried deep in that file, details that would have required reading multiple pages of confidential documents. "Linda," I managed to say once I'd stopped coughing, "how do you know about that case?" She had the audacity to look confused, as if she didn't understand why I was upset. "Oh, I was tidying up your office while you were in the shower. You'd left it right there on your desk." "First of all," I said, struggling to keep my voice level, "that file was closed. Second, my office door was locked. How did you even get in there?" She waved her hand dismissively, as if these were minor details. "Oh, Michael gave me the code weeks ago when I needed to find his birth certificate for something. And honey, that office was filthy. Someone needed to clean it." My office wasn't filthy. Yes, there were a few coffee mugs on my desk and some dust on the bookshelves, but that's because I specifically don't allow our housekeeper in there. All of my files are confidential. Having anyone else in that space is a liability I can't afford. And even if the office had been genuinely dirty, even if I had left that file open, which I hadn't, there is no excuse for sitting down and reading through confidential legal documents. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. Other diners looked over again, but I didn't care. I pulled $40 from my wallet, threw it on the table, and told Linda we were leaving. The ride home was a blur of me yelling, lecturing, and then yelling some more. I explained attorney-client privilege. I explained that I could be disbarred for this kind of breach. I explained that my entire career, everything Michael and I had worked for, could be destroyed if word got out that I was sharing confidential information. Linda kept trying to minimize what she'd done. "Oh, honey, you're overreacting. It's not like I'm going to tell anyone. I was just curious." But that wasn't the point. The point was the violation of trust, the complete disregard for my professional obligations, the fact that she had gone through multiple barriers, including a locked door and a closed file, to access information she had no right to see. When we got home, I told her to pack her things. I said if she wasn't gone in an hour, I'd call the police for trespassing. Was that extreme? Maybe, but I was protecting my career, my reputation, my entire future. I called her an Uber, set the destination as the airport, and watched from the window as she loaded her suitcase into the trunk and drove away. The house felt eerily quiet after she left. I sat in my office, in the very chair where she'd violated my privacy, and tried to calm down. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about snooping. This was about respect, or rather, her complete lack of it. She knew what I did for a living. She knew about attorney-client privilege because we'd talked about it during our Sunday calls when she'd push for more information, and I'd have to remind her of my boundaries. She knew, and she did it anyway. Michael wouldn't know what had happened until he got home from work. His construction site doesn't allow phones for safety reasons, so I couldn't even call to warn him. I spent the afternoon alternating between rage and guilt. Had I overreacted? Should I have given her a chance to apologize properly? But then I'd remember the casual way she'd brought up my client's private information over lunch, as if it were just another piece of gossip from her church, and the anger would come flooding back. When Michael finally walked through the door at 5:30, I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened. He took one look at my face and knew something was very wrong. "Where's my mom?" he asked, and I told him everything. The locked office, the confidential file, the lunch conversation, the Uber to the airport. I watched his face cycle through emotions as he processed what I was telling him. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a tired kind of understanding. He called his mother, and I could hear her voice through the phone, high and defensive. "She was at the airport," she said. "Her evil daughter-in-law had thrown her out for no reason. She was stranded with no money and no ticket home." But as Michael questioned her, her story began to change. First, she said she'd just glanced at the papers while dusting. Then she admitted she'd read a few lines out of curiosity. Finally, after Michael pressed her, she confessed that she'd sat down and read through the entire file because it looked interesting. The more she talked, the more Michael's face hardened. What followed was weeks of back and forth. Linda called and texted constantly, alternating between apologies and accusations. She was sorry, but I'd overreacted. She understood she'd made a mistake, but family should forgive family. She wouldn't do it again, but really, what was the big deal? It was exhausting. The worst part was that she still didn't seem to understand the gravity of what she'd done. In her mind, looking at my files was no different than flipping through a magazine. She couldn't comprehend that she'd potentially put my career at risk, that if my client found out their confidential information had been compromised, I could face a malpractice suit, ethics complaints, and possible disbarment. To her, it was all just drama, entertainment, stories to potentially share with her church friends back home. Michael and I had long conversations about how to handle the situation. He understood why I'd reacted the way I did, but Linda was still his mother. He loved her, despite her flaws. We eventually agreed that she needed to understand the severity of her actions before she could ever be welcomed back into our home. Michael tried to explain it to her, comparing it to breaking into someone's medical files or reading their diary, but she remained defensive. 2 months passed with no contact from my end, though Michael still talked to his mother weekly. Then, with Thanksgiving approaching, Linda started pushing to visit again. We have a tradition of alternating holidays between families, and this year was supposed to be her turn. But I wasn't ready. The thought of her in my home again made my skin crawl. When she called me directly to ask if we were coming to Georgia for Thanksgiving, I told her no. I told her I was still angry, still hurt, and that her apologies had never actually been directed at me, the person she'd wronged. That's when she dropped a bombshell that explained everything and nothing all at once. She said she thought it was okay to read the files because of something called family privilege. In her mind, just as spouses can't be forced to testify against each other in court, family members were bound by some sort of legal code of silence. She thought that because we were family, she could know my secrets, and it would be protected by law. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She had confused spousal privilege, which only applies in specific legal proceedings, with some made-up concept of family privilege that gave her carte blanche to invade my privacy. It was simultaneously the dumbest and most creative justification I'd ever heard, and the fact that she'd been operating under this assumption for who knows how long explained why she'd felt so comfortable pushing for more information about my cases. Part of me wanted to forgive her then. It was clearly a misunderstanding born of ignorance rather than malice. But another part of me, the part that had worked so hard to build my career, couldn't let it go. Ignorance doesn't excuse the locked door, the closed file, the complete violation of clearly stated boundaries. And it definitely didn't excuse her attitude afterward. The way she'd tried to make me feel like I was overreacting to something that could have destroyed everything I'd worked for. That Thanksgiving came and went without Linda. Michael and I stayed home, cooked a small turkey for ourselves, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But there was a Linda-shaped hole in our holiday, an absence that we both felt but didn't quite know how to talk about. She sent us pictures of her dinner, a sad-looking plate from the church potluck, and I felt a stab of guilt that I quickly pushed away. As Christmas approached, the situation became even more complicated. Linda's financial situation, which had always been precarious, was getting worse. She worked part-time at a dental office, making just enough to cover her mortgage and basic bills. For years, Michael and I had been supplementing her income, sending her a few $100s each month so she could afford groceries, gas, and the occasional small luxury. It wasn't a lot of money to us, but to her, it made the difference between surviving and actually living. But after what happened, I'd stopped the payments. It was petty, I know, but I needed her to understand that actions have consequences. Michael could send her money from his personal account if he wanted. But I wasn't going to subsidize someone who had so little respect for my career and boundaries. This decision led to more guilt, more late-night conversations with Michael about whether I was being too harsh, and more calls from Linda about how she was struggling. Then came the accident that changed everything once again. Linda's younger sister Annie has a daughter named Emma, who goes to college here in Seattle. Emma is a lovely girl, smart and funny and kind. Since she's the only family we have in the area, we'd become close to her. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, do her laundry at our house, and crash in our guest room during school breaks. I'd grown genuinely fond of her, and she filled a niche-shaped hole in our lives. One evening in early February, Emma was driving home from a late class when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. The call came at 11:30 at night. Michael and I were already in bed when my phone rang. It was the hospital. Emma had been in an accident. She was alive but injured. Could we come? We threw on clothes and raced to the hospital, my hands shaking the entire drive. The image of Emma, young and vibrant and full of life, hurt and scared in a hospital bed, made me want to scream. When we arrived, the reality was both better and worse than I'd imagined. Better because she was conscious and coherent. Worse because her left leg was broken in 2 places, and both of her wrists were fractured. The doctor said she was lucky. Looking at the pictures of her car later, I understood what he meant. It looked like a crushed soda can. It was a miracle she'd survived at all. I called Annie immediately, trying to stay calm as I explained what had happened. I could hear her panic through the phone, the way her breath caught when I said the word accident, the relief when I assured her Emma was okay. Of course she wanted to come immediately. Of course she needed to see her daughter. What I didn't expect was for her to show up with Linda in tow. They arrived the next afternoon, having taken the first available flight. I understood Annie bringing her sister for emotional support. I really did. But seeing Linda in that hospital corridor, looking tired and worried and somehow smaller than I remembered, brought up all the anger I'd been trying to move past. This wasn't about her, I reminded myself. This was about Emma. I could be civil for Emma's sake. At first, things were okay. Annie focused on her daughter, as she should. She talked to doctors, arranged for Emma's care, figured out insurance complications. Linda sat quietly in the corner of the hospital room, occasionally fetching coffee or holding Emma's hand when Annie needed a break. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could get through this visit without drama. But Linda couldn't help herself. After 2 days of relative peace, she started pushing. Annie had gotten a hotel room near the hospital, and Linda was staying with her. But Linda wanted to come back to our house. She was tired, she said. The hotel bed hurt her back. She just needed a few hours to rest in a real bed. Couldn't I put aside our differences for family? When I said no, when I held firm to my boundaries, she escalated. She showed up at our gated community in an Uber, telling the security guard she was Michael's mother and demanding to be let in. When the guard called us, as per our instructions, Michael went to handle it. I thought he'd simply turn her away, explain again why she wasn't welcome. Instead, I got a call saying she'd been detained by security for throwing things at the guards. Apparently, when they wouldn't let her in, she'd completely lost control. She'd grabbed anything within reach, staplers, a cup full of pens, even a small radio, and hurled them at the security booth. But Michael, sweet Michael, who still eats his mother as the woman who raised him, rather than the woman who'd violated our trust, talked them out of it. He smoothed things over, drove her back to the hotel, and came home looking defeated. The security guards now had strict instructions to call the police immediately if she showed up again. Our home had become a fortress against his own mother. The situation with Emma and Linda came to a head the next day. I'd gone to the hospital to spend the evening with Emma, while Annie got some rest. We were having a nice time, talking about her classes and her boyfriend, and whether she should change her major. I'd brought her favorite snacks and some magazines, and for a little while, it felt almost normal. Then Linda walked in with McDonald's and an attitude. She looked at the snacks I'd brought, healthy stuff mostly because Emma had mentioned wanting to eat better, and made a disgusted face. She tried to force the fast food on Emma, insisting that she needed real food to heal. When Emma politely declined, saying she was full from what I'd brought, Linda lost it. "Oh, so Sarah gets to do everything and I can't do anything right?" she snapped. "She's not even your real aunt. I'm your grandmother's sister. I'm your blood. But no, Sarah's snacks are good enough, and mine aren't." Emma looked confused and a little scared. This wasn't about snacks, and we all knew it. But before I could diffuse the situation, Linda turned on me with a venom I'd never seen from her before. "You think you're so special, don't you? With your fancy job and your fancy house and your fancy life, but you're not even a real woman. A real woman would have given my son children by now. A real woman wouldn't turn family away from her home." The words hit me like a physical blow. You see, what Linda didn't know, what we hadn't told anyone, was that Michael and I had been trying to have children for the past year. After months of nothing happening, we'd gone to a specialist. The tests showed that the problem was me. My body, for reasons the doctors couldn't fully explain, wasn't capable of carrying a pregnancy. We'd cried together when we got the news, mourned the biological children we'd never have, and started researching adoption options. It was still a raw wound, one I was learning to live with but hadn't fully accepted. For Linda to throw that in my face, even unknowingly, was cruel beyond measure. But before I could respond, before I could even process what she'd said, she grabbed the large Coke she'd brought and threw it at me. The cold liquid exploded across my designer handbag, soaking into the leather and dripping onto my clothes. The nurses saw it happen. Security was called. Emma was crying, begging them to make Linda leave. And Linda, realizing she was about to be forcibly removed, actually ran from the hospital security. For a woman in her 50s who complained about her bad back, she moved remarkably fast. That night, after I'd cleaned myself up and thrown away my ruined purse, Michael and I had the hardest conversation of our marriage. He'd been trying to balance his love for his mother with his loyalty to me, but she'd finally crossed a line he couldn't ignore. The comment about me not being a real woman had enraged him in a way I'd never seen before. He called her that night and told her she was no longer welcome in our lives until she could genuinely apologize and change her behavior. What followed was weeks of manipulation and guilt trips. Linda called crying, saying she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She texted Bible verses about forgiveness. She enlisted other family members to plead her case. But we held firm. Michael changed his phone number. I blocked her on everything. We informed the security at our complex that she was not allowed under any circumstances and that police should be called immediately if she appeared. Then, 2 months later, came the lunch that explained everything. Michael had maintained limited contact with his mother through email, and she'd begged for one last meeting before she flew back to Georgia. Against my better judgment, we agreed. We met at a neutral location, a restaurant downtown, where she couldn't make too much of a scene. That's when she revealed her master plan. For years, she'd assumed that when we had children, she'd move in with us to be a full-time nanny. That was her retirement plan. She hadn't saved money because she thought she'd be taken care of by us in exchange for childcare. She'd been waiting for me to get pregnant, to need her help, to beg her to move in and save us from the overwhelming task of new parenthood. When Michael told her about our fertility issues, her plan crumbled. There would be no baby to care for, no reason for her to move into our guest room permanently, no retirement plan. That's why she'd been so desperate to get back into our house. She saw her future slipping away and panicked. The snooping, the demands, the tantrums, it all made a twisted kind of sense. She wasn't just losing access to our home. In her mind, she was losing her entire future. The lunch ended with her saying the most hurtful thing yet. "If your wife was a real woman, I wouldn't have to worry about being homeless in my old age." Michael stood up so fast his chair fell over. He threw cash on the table, took my hand, and we left without another word. I cried the whole way home, not just from the hurt, but from the relief that Michael had finally, fully chosen me over her. That was 6 months ago, and we haven't spoken to Linda since. She still emails Michael occasionally, usually asking for money or trying to guilt him into contact. He forwards them to a folder without reading them. We've focused on our own lives, on building the family we want through adoption. We're approved foster parents now, waiting for a placement. Our guest room is being converted into a child's room, painted a cheerful yellow, because we don't know if we'll get a boy or a girl. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about Linda alone in her small house in Georgia, struggling to make ends meet. I think about the good years, the Sunday phone calls, the woman who welcomed me into her family with open arms. But then I remember the violation, the cruelty, the complete lack of respect for my career and my boundaries. I remember her calling me not a real woman, and my resolve hardens. Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about respect, trust, and mutual support. Linda broke that trust in a way that can't be easily repaired. She showed me that her love was conditional, based on what I could provide for her rather than who I am. And while I'm sad about how things ended, I'm not sorry for protecting myself and my career from someone who saw me as a means to an end rather than a person deserving of respect. The other day, Emma came over for dinner. She's doing well, walking with just a slight limp now. She thanked us for being there for her during the accident, for handling Linda so she and her mom didn't have to. She said something that stuck with me. She said, "You know, Aunt Sarah, family isn't about putting up with toxic behavior just because you share DNA or a last name. Family is about choosing to treat each other with love and respect. You're more family to me than Linda ever was." And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. We get to choose our family, not just the people we're born to or marry into, but the people we surround ourselves with every day. We get to set boundaries and expect them to be respected. We get to protect ourselves from those who would harm us, even if they share our last name. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is to say no more and mean it. Michael and I are doing well now. We're excited about our adoption journey, about the child or children who will someday call us mom and dad. We've learned to set boundaries and stick to them to protect what we've built together. And if our future child ever marries someone in a profession with strict confidentiality requirements, you can bet we'll respect those boundaries. Because that's what real family does. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want you to know that it's okay to protect yourself from family members who don't respect you. It's okay to choose your career, your marriage, your peace of mind over someone else's expectations. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when that someone has shown they'll gladly watch you burn. Whether you're dealing with a difficult mother-in-law, a boundary-crossing relative, or anyone who doesn't respect your hard-earned achievements, remember that you deserve better. You deserve a family that celebrates your successes rather than trying to exploit them. You deserve love without conditions, respect without exceptions, and the peace that comes from knowing your boundaries will be honored. Thank you for letting me share this with you today. I know it was long, but sometimes the most important stories are the ones that take time to tell. If you're struggling with similar family dynamics, know that you're not alone. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. Protecting your career doesn't make you selfish. And cutting off someone who repeatedly hurts you doesn't make you unforgiving. It makes you someone who values themselves enough to demand better. And that, my friends, is what being a real woman is all about. Looking back now, there are so many moments I wish I could have handled differently. And yet, I'm not sure I would change anything. The journey to where Michael and I are now has been painful but necessary. Let me share with you some of the deeper layers of this story, the parts that still keep me awake at night sometimes. You see, the hardest part about cutting off a family member isn't the act itself. It's not the dramatic moment when you say no more or when you block their number. The hardest part comes later, in the quiet moments when you're going about your daily life and something reminds you of them. For me, it happens when I'm cooking Sunday dinner and I automatically reach for Linda's favorite spice blend, the one she taught me to use on roast chicken. It happens when I see elderly women at the grocery store, carefully counting their change, and I wonder if Linda is doing the same thing back in Georgia. Michael struggles with it too, though he tries to hide it from me. I catch him sometimes, staring at his phone with this lost expression, and I know he's thinking about calling her. His birthday passed last month, and for the first time in his life, He didn't get a call from his mother. He said he was fine, said it was better this way, but I saw him checking his phone all day, waiting for something that never came. That night, after he thought I was asleep, I heard him crying in the bathroom. Quiet, muffled sobs that broke my heart because I knew he was mourning not just the mother he'd lost, but the mother he'd never really had. The truth is, Linda's behavior didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back with the clarity that distance provides, I can see the warning signs we missed or explained away. The way she'd always favored Michael over his younger brother, who moved to Australia partly to escape her suffocating attention. The way she'd guilt-trip Michael whenever he couldn't visit, saying things like, "I won't be around forever," or, "I guess my own son is too important for his mother now." The way she'd insert herself into every major decision we made, from buying our house to choosing our wedding venue, always with tears and manipulation if we didn't follow her suggestions. I remember our wedding planning with a different perspective now. At the time, I thought Linda was just an enthusiastic mother of the groom. She had opinions about everything, including the flowers, the music, the guest list, the menu. When we gently pushed back, saying we wanted a small, intimate ceremony, she cried actual tears. She said we were shutting her out, that this was her only chance to see her baby boy get married, that she'd dreamed of this day since he was born. So we compromised, and compromised, and compromised. Our wedding ended up being twice the size we wanted, with her entire church congregation invited because they've known Michael since he was in diapers. The birth certificate incident that led to her having our office code is another example of how she operated. When Michael told me about it during our confrontation, he admitted that her request had seemed strange at the time. She'd called him in a panic one day, saying she needed his original birth certificate for some government form. She was crying, saying it was urgent, that she could lose her benefits if she didn't submit it immediately. Michael, being at work and unable to leave, gave her the code so she could get it herself. But here's the thing, we found out later, there was no government form. When we pressed her about it months after the fact, she couldn't remember what form she'd needed or why it had been so urgent. She'd manufactured a crisis to get access to our private space. This pattern of manufactured crises was something we'd grown so accustomed to that we didn't even recognize it as manipulation. There was always some emergency that required our immediate attention or financial help. Her car would break down right before a visit, necessitating us to buy her plane tickets instead. Her hours at work would get cut just when we were considering a vacation, making us feel guilty for spending money on ourselves instead of helping her. Her refrigerator would die right before the holidays, and of course we couldn't let her go without food. Looking back, I wonder how many of these crises were real, and how many were carefully orchestrated to keep us financially and emotionally tethered to her. The financial aspect of our relationship with Linda is something I still struggle with. Growing up, my own parents taught me the importance of financial independence. They helped me through school but made it clear that once I was established in my career, I was expected to stand on my own 2 feet. They saved aggressively for retirement, so they wouldn't be a burden on my brother and me. This was normal to me, the way family was supposed to operate. Michael's family was different. Linda had always lived paycheck to paycheck, never saving, always spending just a little more than she earned. She'd refinanced her house multiple times, pulling out equity for vacations and shopping sprees, always assuming that something would work out. That something, I now realize, was Michael. From the moment he got his first real job, she'd lean on him for help. $20 here, $50 there, then hundreds as his career progressed. By the time we got married, he was essentially paying for 2 households without really realizing it. I tried to be understanding at first. Not everyone has the privilege of financial literacy or the ability to save. But as our support became an expectation rather than emergency help, I grew resentful. We were trying to save for our own future, for the children we hoped to have, for retirement, so we wouldn't burden those same hypothetical children. Yet every month, money flowed to Linda for expenses that seemed to grow rather than shrink. When I suggested she might need to downsize her house or find a second job, Michael looked at me like I'd suggested abandoning a puppy on the side of the road. The revelation about her retirement plan being to move in with us and nanny our children explained so much. All those years of financial irresponsibility weren't just poor planning. They were based on the assumption that she'd be taken care of by us eventually. She'd been banking on grandchildren as her meal ticket, never considering that we might not have children or might not want a live-in nanny, or might value our privacy and independence. The entitlement of it still takes my breath away. What makes me angriest about the whole situation is how it's affected my relationship with Michael's extended family. Linda, of course, didn't keep our estrangement quiet. She told everyone who would listen her version of events, painting me as the villain who'd torn a son away from his loving mother. His aunts and uncles, cousins, and family friends all got a steady diet of how cruel I was, how I'd overreacted to a simple misunderstanding, how I was controlling Michael and isolating him from his family. We started getting calls and messages from relatives we barely knew, all pleading Linda's case. His Aunt Martha called me directly, saying I needed to forgive Linda because family is family. His cousin David sent Michael a long email about how he'd regret cutting off his mother when she was gone. The family pastor even reached out, offering to mediate what he called a simple disagreement that had gotten out of hand. None of them knew the full story, of course. Linda hadn't mentioned breaking into my office, reading confidential files, or calling me not a real woman. She certainly hadn't mentioned her plan to move in with us permanently. In her version, she was just a loving mother who'd made a tiny mistake and was being punished cruelly for it. We tried explaining our side at first. Michael had a long phone call with his aunt, laying out exactly what had happened and why we needed space from Linda. But it was like talking to a wall. The family narrative was set. Linda was the victim, I was the villain, and Michael was a son under his wife's evil influence. Eventually, we stopped trying to defend ourselves. We stopped answering the calls and messages. We became, in essence, estranged not just from Linda, but from Michael's entire side of the family. This broader estrangement has been particularly hard on Michael. He grew up close to his cousins, spending summers at family reunions, holidays surrounded by aunts and uncles. Now, he's cut off from all of that, guilty by association with me. He says he doesn't blame me, says he knows this is Linda's doing, not mine. But I see the sadness in his eyes when his cousin posts pictures from family gatherings on social media, events we're no longer invited to. I carry the guilt of that, even though I know I didn't cause this situation. The impact on our marriage has been complex. In some ways, going through this ordeal has made us stronger. We've had to communicate more openly than ever before, to examine our values and priorities, to choose each other deliberately every single day. We've learned that we're a team, that we can weather incredibly difficult situations together, but it's also introduced stresses we never expected to face. There are times when I wonder if Michael resents me deep down for the loss of his mother. He's never said anything to suggest it, but sometimes I catch him looking wistful when we pass a mother and son having lunch together, or when his coworkers talk about their weekend plans with their parents. I've asked him directly if he blames me, and he always says no. Always reassures me that Linda made her choices and faces the consequences. But the doubt lingers sometimes, especially on the hard days. Our journey toward adoption has been both healing and challenging in light of everything that's happened with Linda. When we first started the process, I was terrified that Linda would somehow insert herself into it. What if she showed up at our house during a home visit? What if she contacted our adoption agency with lies about us? What if she tried to grandparent rights once we had a child? These fears kept me up at night, planning for contingencies that might never happen. We ended up being completely transparent with our adoption counselor about the family situation. We explained the estrangement, the reasons behind it, and our concerns about Linda potentially disrupting the process. The counselor I felt we weren't now. If we're blessed with children who grow up and find partners, I want to be the kind of mother-in-law who respects boundaries, who understands that my child's spouse is not an extension of me, but a separate person deserving of privacy and respect. I want to the journey as if we all the but Linda it's about she saw as we high on we want where she'd in that the Linda we have is still in Georgia, still telling anyone who will listen about her cruel daughter-in-law and her son who abandoned her. She's probably still living beyond her means, still expecting someone else to solve her problems, still unable to see how her own actions led to this estrangement. I know this because occasionally, despite our no-contact boundary, news filters through. A mutual acquaintance will mention running into her, or she'll pop up in the background of someone's social media post. She looks older, maybe a little sadder, but fundamentally unchanged. There's a part of me that will always mourn the relationship that could have been. I went into marriage hoping for a second mother, a friend, someone to share the journey with, For a few years, I thought I had that with Linda. Those Sunday phone calls were real to me, even if they were just information gathering sessions for her. The laughter we shared over her small town gossip was genuine, even if she was mentally filing away my stories for her own purposes. The loss of that relationship, or rather the realization that it was never what I thought it was, is something I'm still processing. But I'm also grateful for the clarity this situation has brought. It's forced Michael and me to examine our boundaries, to communicate more openly, to choose each other deliberately. It's taught us that we're stronger than we knew, that we can weather family storms and come out intact on the other side. It's prepared us to be better parents, more protective of our future children, more aware of the ways family can both hurt and heal. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want you to know that whatever family situation you're dealing with, your feelings are valid. Whether it's a mother-in-law who doesn't respect boundaries, a parent who manipulates and guilt trips, or any family member who makes you feel less than you are, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to say no, to set limits, to choose your own well-being over someone else's expectations. The path isn't easy. There will be guilt, doubt, and moments when you question whether you're doing the right thing. There will be flying monkeys and family pressure, and the weight of societal expectations that say family should forgive everything. But there's freedom on the other side of those boundaries, a peace that comes from knowing you've chosen to protect what matters most to you. For me, what matters most is my marriage, my career, and the family Michael and I are building together. Those things are worth protecting, even from someone who shares our last name. Linda may never understand why we've cut her off, may go to her grave believing she's the victim in this story. And that's okay. I'm not responsible for her understanding, only for my own choices and their consequences. If you're listening to this and seeing parallels in your own life, know that you're not alone. There are so many of us who've had to make the difficult decision to step back from toxic family members. We don't talk about it much, because there's still so much shame around family estrangement, so much pressure to forgive and forget. But sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is create distance from someone who repeatedly shows they're incapable of respecting your boundaries. Remember, too, that estrangement doesn't have to be forever. People can change, though they rarely do without significant motivation. Maybe someday Linda will genuinely understand what she did wrong and work to make amends. Maybe she'll get therapy, develop insight, and become someone safe to have in our lives. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not completely closing the door either. What I am doing is protecting my present and future from someone who's proven themselves unsafe. And that's a decision I'll never apologize for. To all the women out there who've been told you're not real because of infertility, because of your choices, because you don't fit someone else's narrow definition of womanhood, I see you. You are real, you are valid, and you are enough exactly as you are. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel otherwise. Your worth isn't determined by your ability to have children, to tolerate mistreatment, or to sacrifice yourself for others' comfort. You are a real woman because you say you are, full stop. And to those dealing with difficult in-law relationships, remember that your spouse chose you. They stood in front of friends and family and chose you as their partner, their priority, their new primary family. That doesn't mean abandoning their family of origin, but it does mean that your relationship comes first. If your spouse isn't willing to protect that relationship from their family's interference, that's a problem that needs addressing. You deserve a partner who chooses you, not just on your wedding day, but every day after. Thank you for staying with me through this long and winding story. Thank you for holding space for the pain and the growth, the anger and the healing. Your time and attention mean more to me than you know. If this story helps even one person feel less alone in their family struggles, if it gives even one person permission to set the boundaries they need, then sharing it has been worth it. Remember, you are worthy of respect, deserving of kindness, and absolutely entitled to protect your peace. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As I sit here in my home office, the same one Linda violated all those months ago, I'm struck by how much has changed. This room, once a crime scene of broken trust, has become a sanctuary again. I've rearranged the furniture, painted the walls a calming blue, and installed an even better lock. But more than the physical changes, it's the emotional transformation that matters. I no longer flinch when I enter this room. I no longer wonder if someone has been through my files. The security I feel isn't just about the new lock. It's about knowing that Michael and I have created boundaries strong enough to protect what matters. Yesterday, Emma came by for her weekly dinner with us. She's graduating next month, walking across that stage with only the slightest limp as evidence of her accident. As we sat around our dining table, laughing about her senioritis and job hunting adventures, I realized that this is what family really looks like. It's chosen, it's respectful, and it's based on genuine affection rather than obligation. Emma has never once made me feel like less of a woman for my fertility struggles. She's never violated our trust or pushed our boundaries. She shows up not because she has to, but because she wants to. And we welcome her not from duty, but from love. The adoption process continues to move forward. We've been matched with a sibling group, two children who need a home where they can stay together. They're not babies, which might have disappointed the old me, who dreamed of nurseries and first steps. They're school-aged, with their own histories and traumas and needs. But as we prepare their rooms and learn about their favorite foods and interests, I'm filled with a certainty that this is exactly how our family is meant to form. These children don't need a grandmother who would see them as do-over babies or retirement insurance. They need stability, boundaries, and parents who will protect them fiercely. We can give them that. Michael has been doing his own healing work through all of this. He's in therapy now, unpacking years of manipulation and guilt that he'd normalized. He's learning to recognize the patterns, to see how Linda's behavior shaped his responses to conflict and his sense of obligation. It's hard work, the kind that leaves him exhausted and raw some evenings. But I see the changes in him, the way he's able to articulate his feelings more clearly, the way he's learning to say no without guilt, the way he's becoming an even better partner as he heals from wounds he didn't even know he had. We've created new traditions to fill the spaces left by our estrangement from his family. Sunday dinners with chosen family and friends who've become like siblings to us. Holiday celebrations that center around what we want rather than managing Linda's expectations. We volunteer at a local family shelter, using our privilege to help others who are struggling. These new traditions feel intentional and meaningful in a way that the old obligations never did. Sometimes I wonder what Linda would think if she could see us now, thriving without her. Would she recognize that her prophecies of doom didn't come true? Would she see that cutting her off didn't destroy Michael or our marriage, but actually allowed both to flourish? Or would she still be trapped in her own narrative, unable to see past her grievances to the reality of what her behavior cost her? I suspect it's the latter, and that makes me sad for her, even as I remain committed to protecting ourselves from her. The greatest gift in all of this has been the deepening of my marriage. Michael and I have always been good together, but going through this trial by fire has forged us into something stronger. We communicate with a depth and honesty that we might never have achieved without this catalyst. We protect each other fiercely. We choose each other daily, not from habit or convenience, but from a deep understanding of what we could lose if we don't tend to this relationship with care. To everyone listening who sees their own story reflected in mine, I want to leave you with this. You have the right to a peaceful life. You have the right to be respected in your own home. You have the right to protect your career, your marriage, your mental health from anyone who would threaten them, regardless of their relationship to you. These aren't selfish desires. They're basic human needs, and anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is telling you more about their own character than yours. The journey to where we are now hasn't been easy, and I won't pretend otherwise. There have been days when the guilt felt crushing, when the chorus of flying monkeys made me doubt my decisions, when I wondered if keeping the peace would have been easier than protecting my boundaries. But each time I wavered, I remembered the look on Linda's face when she casually discussed my confidential files over lunch. I remembered the sting of coke across my face and the words, not a real woman, echoing in that hospital room. And I remembered that I deserve better. We all do. So here's to boundaries. As difficult as they are to establish and maintain, here's to chosen family who respect and support us. Here's to marriages that grow stronger through adversity. Here's to careers we've worked hard to build and have every right to protect. And here's to all of us who've had to learn the hard way that sometimes loving someone means loving them from a distance, for our own protection and peace. Your story matters. Your boundaries matter. You matter. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you for listening, for understanding, and for being part of my chosen family, even if just for the length of this story. May you find the strength to protect what's precious to you, and may you always remember that you are, without question or qualification, a real woman worthy of respect and love.